Editing Tyler here. I did also want to let you know that I've got the link to the Geneva Conventions of 12 August 1949 in the description, so you can go check that out for yourself. It's a full 224-page document, and should be easy for you. But I will tell you, it's definitely got a lot of legal jargon and whatnot in there. So, all right, on with the episode. War is chaos. So the idea that war has rules almost sounds ridiculous at first, but eventually things got so horrific that the world had to draw lines somewhere. If you've been online long enough, you've probably heard the joke that the Geneva Convention exists because of Poland, Canada, or both. Funny line, not really true. The real story starts earlier, and it's darker than a meme. So today, we're breaking down the Geneva Convention Barney Style, where it came from, why it exists, and what the rules actually are in normal, run-of-the-mill human language. The easiest way to understand the Geneva Convention is to start with one simple truth. It exists because war has always had a way of dragging out the worst in people. Once fear, revenge, ideology, and survival take over, the floor falls out fast. The rules of war were not created because war became civilized. They were created because war kept becoming savage enough that even governments had to admit there had to be limits. And that's the first thing people get wrong. The Geneva Convention is not some magical handbook that makes war clean. It doesn't. It doesn't make battle noble, polite, or fair. It's a set of protections meant to stop war from becoming even more monstrous than it already is. At the absolute bare minimum, it says that there are some lines you are not supposed to cross. The roots of that idea go back well before the World Wars. The real origin starts in the 1800s, when warfare was already brutal enough that one man looked at the battlefield and came away with the thought that there had to be some kind of rule for the wounded. That man was Henry Dunant, a Swiss businessman who witnessed the aftermath of the Battle of Solferino in 1859. What he saw was not an orderly military cleanup. It was a disaster. Huge numbers of wounded soldiers had been left behind with inadequate care, inadequate supplies, and no real system to help them. Dunant was horrified by what he saw, and he wrote about it. He pushed two major ideas. First, that there should be organized volunteer relief groups to care for the wounded in war, and second, that countries should agree to a treaty requiring care for wounded soldiers no matter what uniform they wore. That push helped lead to the founding of what became the International Committee of the Red Cross, and in 1864, the first Geneva Convention. That matters because it tells you what this started as. At the beginning, this was not some giant all-in-one rule book for every part of war. It was narrower. The earliest version was focused on wounded and sick soldiers in the field. In plain English, the original idea was simple. If a soldier is hurt and out of the fight, you don't just leave them there to rot because he happens to be on the other side. And that's really the pattern for the whole story. These rules were built because history kept showing the world what happened when they didn't exist, or didn't go far enough. They were responses to blood, neglect, torture, starvation, displacement, and the ugly reality that when war is left completely unchecked, civilians get swallowed up in it. Prisoners get brutalized, and the wounded stop being treated like human beings. So no, the Geneva Convention did not begin because of internet jokes about Canada, and it did not begin because people later used Poland as shorthand for World War II horrors. Those are much later associations. The real beginning is older and more human than that. One man saw a battlefield full of suffering and pushed the world toward the idea that even in war, the wounded deserve care. That was the seed. If chapter 1 is the why, chapter 2 is the how. Because when most people say the Geneva Convention, they picture one giant rule book that always existed in its current form. That's not really what happened. It was built piece by piece. The first version grew out of Dunant's shock after Solferino, the creation of the ICRC in 1863, and the first Geneva Convention in 1864. That original treaty focused on wounded and sick soldiers on land and on protecting the medical personnel trying to care for them. From there, the rules kept evolving because war kept evolving. As wars got larger, more industrial, and more total, the original protections weren't enough. Warfare spilled into the sea. It swallowed prisoners. It dragged civilian populations into the middle of things on a massive scale. By 1949, after the devastation of World War II, states revised the earlier conventions and adopted the modern framework people usually mean today. The 4 Geneva Conventions of 1949. That post-war jump matters because it showed the old protections were too narrow. The wounded needed protection. People at sea needed protection. Prisoners of war needed protection. Civilians needed protection. The system had to widen because the suffering had widened. So when people say the Geneva Convention, the Barney Style version is this. It's really 4 conventions working together. The first protects wounded and sick members of armed forces on land. The second covers the wounded, sick, and shipwrecked at sea. The third covers prisoners of war, and the fourth protects civilians, especially civilians under enemy control during war or occupation. That's the backbone. And the moral center of all of it is pretty simple. The Geneva Conventions are not mainly about making armies fight fair. They're about protecting people once they are out of the fight, or never should have been in it to begin with. Civilians, medics, aid workers, wounded soldiers, shipwrecked sailors, prisoners of war, that's the heart of the system. One of the clearest windows into that is Common Article 3, which sets a minimum baseline for people not actively taking part in hostilities. In plain English, no murder, no mutilation, no cruel treatment, no torture, no hostage taking, no humiliating or degrading treatment, and no punishment without basic judicial guarantees. If you wanted the shortest possible version of what the Geneva Conventions are trying to stop, that's one of the clearest places to look. The easiest way to keep the 4 conventions straight is not to memorize article numbers. Just think of them as 4 main protection zones. The first is for the wounded and sick on land, the second for the wounded, sick, and shipwrecked at sea, the third is for prisoners of war, and the fourth is for civilians, especially civilians under enemy control in war or occupation. That's it. 4 lanes. The first Geneva Convention says that if somebody is injured, out of action, or laying there needing treatment, they are not supposed to be discarded because they wear the wrong uniform. Medical personnel caring for them are protected too. So right out of the gate, the law is saying two things. The wounded matter, and the people trying to save them matter too. The second Geneva Convention applies that same logic to war at sea. If troops are wounded, sick, or shipwrecked, they are supposed to be protected and cared for. Once someone is no longer actively fighting and is in a helpless condition, the law says you don't get to treat them like disposable trash. The third Geneva Convention deals with prisoners of war. As mentioned before, a captured enemy soldier is still a human being. You can detain them, but you can't torture them, starve them, humiliate them for fun, or kill them because they are inconvenient. Once they're in your custody, your side becomes responsible for how they're treated. And the fourth Geneva Convention focuses on civilians. That includes people living under occupation or otherwise under foreign control during conflict. This became especially important after World War II, when the world had seen with horrifying clarity that civilians were not just side victims in modern war. They were often directly targeted, uprooted, imprisoned, and terrorized on a massive scale. So the useful takeaway is this. The Geneva Conventions are a system for protecting people once war places them in a vulnerable category: wounded, sick, shipwrecked, civilian, captured, medical, humanitarian, and that's the common thread. All right, this is the part most people actually came for. What are the rules? What does the Geneva Convention actually say you can't do? And just so we're clear, this isn't me reading treaty articles at you like a robot. The real conventions are detailed and they're written like law because they are law. But the basic principles are not complicated at all. They're just heavy. So here's the Geneva Convention, Barney Style. Rule number 1. If someone isn't fighting, you don't get to treat them like a target. If a person is not actively taking part in fighting, like civilians, medics, or people who are wounded and out of the fight, they're protected. Rule number 2. If someone is wounded or sick, you have to care for them, even if they're the enemy. That's one of the oldest foundations of the whole Geneva idea. The enemy uniform doesn't cancel basic care. Rule number 3. You don't get to torture people. Ever. Full stop. Common Article 3 prohibits murder, mutilation, cruel treatment, torture, hostage taking, and humiliating or degrading treatment toward people not actively fighting. In normal language, no torture, no abuse, no excuses. Rule number 4. Prisoners of war are prisoners. They're not your revenge project. If you capture an enemy soldier, you can detain them, but you can't turn captivity into cruelty. Once they're in your custody, their treatment is your responsibility. Rule number 5. No hostage taking. That one is exactly what it sounds like. You do not get to take hostages as leverages. Rule number 6. Don't attack medical workers or medical facilities for doing their job. The whole point is that if someone is trying to save lives, that protection is supposed to matter. Rule number 7. Civilians under occupation still have rights. Occupation doesn't mean a civilian population becomes property. Civilians are still protected persons. Rule number 8. You can't just punish or execute people without a real legal process. Common Article 3 bars sentencing or execution without proper judicial guarantees. In plain English, war does not give you a free pass to disappear people and call it justice. Rule number 9. Humane treatment isn't optional. That's the heart of all of it. If someone is wounded, captured, civilian, or otherwise protected, humane treatment is the baseline expectation. And once you hear it like that, the Geneva Convention starts to sound less like a random internet phrase and more like what it really is. A system designed to protect human beings when war puts them at their most vulnerable. One reason the Geneva Convention has such a weird online reputation is because most people know the phrase before they know the meaning. It escaped into everyday language. So now people throw it around anytime they hear about some brutal weapon, ugly tactic, or military story that sounds especially nasty. Sometimes they're pointing in the right direction, but the phrase gets used so loosely now that it flattens important distinctions. The first misunderstanding is that the Geneva Convention is one single document with one master list of everything evil you can't do. It's not. It's 4 conventions from 1949, later supplemented by additional protocols, all sitting inside the broader framework of international humanitarian law. So when somebody says that's against the Geneva Convention, they may be pointing at a real legal issue, but they are often oversimplifying where the rule actually comes from. The second misunderstanding is that these rules were designed to make war fair. Not really. Their job is to protect people who are vulnerable in war. Civilians, prisoners, and wounded, and the like we've said before. Another misunderstanding is the meme version of the origin story. That it all started because Canada, Poland, or one especially wild moment in war. The truth is broader than that. The system began in the 1800s with battlefield care for the wounded, then expanded over time as war kept proving how wide abuse could spread. It wasn't built because of one joke-worthy example. It was built because history kept giving humanity new ways to fail. And then there's the mistake of assuming every horrifying wartime act comes specifically from the Geneva Conventions. Some prohibitions come from other treaties, customary international law, or related legal frameworks. So someone can be morally right that something sounds horrific while still being legally sloppy about what rule they are actually talking about. That's really the key takeaway. The Geneva Conventions do not exist to make war civilized. They exist to stop it from collapsing all the way into barbarism. So when people joke about the Geneva Convention online, what they're usually referencing is the idea that war got so brutal the world had to make a list. And in a stripped down way, that part is true. And when you break it down Barney style, the heart of it is simple. If somebody's wounded, captured, or not fighting, you don't get to treat them like they stopped being human. If somebody is a civilian, you don't get to write them off because war makes that convenient. If somebody is trying to provide medical care, that protection is supposed to matter. The Geneva Conventions don't make war good. They draw lines in the middle of humanity's worst behavior and say, even here, there are things you're not supposed to become. At the end of the day, I'm not sitting here trying to wipe a country clean. Countries have rules, and sometimes those rules get broken. A lot of the time, that's on the individual, and it has absolutely nothing to do with the upper leadership. But when it does come from the upper leadership down, then it's a problem. So I'm not going to be sitting here and saying, oh, this country's evil or that country's evil or anything like that. But there are rules. And it even comes down to like your own civilians, you know. So, yeah. And I think that needs to be understood. And, you know, you get people that throw like, oh, we're at war here, we're at war there, or that country's at war with that country. When specifically with America, we're not at war with any country unless Congress says we're at war with that country. So that's, I guess that's where the debate would come into. Does the Geneva Convention apply if you're not technically at war congressionally? I don't know. I'm not a lawyer. I'm a normal freaking guy. So yeah, this isn't like protection. It's not some big political move, but I do hear it a lot where people are talking about Geneva Conventions. I think we did need a very, very brief Barney Style version of the Geneva Convention so that people can actually fully understand what is the point of it, where it came from, and why it matters today, specifically in this time in history, because there's a lot going on. So thank you for watching. Appreciate you. Love you. Bye.